The night sky over Earth split open with light. At first, people thought it was another storm, a strange aurora stretching across the horizon. But then the beams sharpened into shapeships, vast and silent, sliding out of the dark. Cities froze. Soldiers were called. Civilians huddled in their homes, whispering that the war everyone feared had finally come. The unexpected had arrived, and it did not look human. The fleet descended without a sound, hundreds of ships hanging above the ground like black suns. Panic filled the air, yet no attack came. Instead, the largest vessel opened its belly, pouring down columns of blue light that struck the earth like prison bars. Out of those beams, two figures stepped forward, chained and bound. They were tall, graceful, their skin pale as silver moonlight, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Though their wrists were locked in bright restraints, their posture was proud. The soldiers tightened their formation, rifles aimed. No one knew what these beings were, or why they had been sent. The world braced for invasion, but the strange arrival felt different. The two alien girls did not fight. They did not speak. They walked together, shackled, as if carrying a burden older than Earth itself. Behind them, the beams closed, and the great fleet drifted back into the clouds, leaving only silence. Commanders shouted for containment. The girls were taken to a landing base, surrounded by armored men and cameras that broadcast their every step. Across the planet, screens lit up with the same image, two chained aliens standing on human soil. People asked the same question: why had they been sent here? Some said it was invasion. Others thought it was exile. Fear thickened like smoke in the air. The captain watched from the edge of the crowd, his hand resting on the grip of his weapon. He had fought battles before, but never against something like this. These weren't soldiers, weren't machines of war. They looked too young, too fragile. Yet there was something unshakable in the way they held their heads high, even in chains. He felt no triumph, no anger. Only questions he dared not speak. That night, the holding field was tense. Guards kept rifles pointed. Spotlights burned down on the two sisters as they sat against the wall of the enclosure. Neither spoke. Their silence unsettled the men. Monsters waiting to strike, one soldier muttered. But the captain wasn't so sure. He had seen monsters before. These weren't monsters. They were prisoners. Whispers spread through the camp. Some said the empire beyond the stars had abandoned them here as punishment. Some claimed they were criminals too dangerous for their own kind to keep. Others feared they were bait, a trap to lure Earth into lowering its guard. Every rumor carried fear, and every pair of eyes turned to the sisters with suspicion. The captain stood alone at the fence, watching them. He studied their faces, their calmness, and for a moment, he thought he saw pain flicker in their eyes. It was the look of someone who had lost everything, someone carrying sorrow instead of rage. He wondered what crime could earn such a punishment. From their own people. And more, he wondered why he cared. The air grew colder as the night stretched on. The ships still lingered in orbit, their shadows passing across the stars, silent and heavy. Earth had not been attacked, but the world held its breath as if waiting for the strike that never came. And in the middle of that silence, two alien girls sat in chains, delivered like gifts of war, yet carrying no weapon but themselves. The captain felt the weight of the moment settle on him. This was no ordinary war. This was something else. Something hidden. He could sense it deep inside, though he could not name it yet. The world saw enemies. The soldiers saw threats. But when he looked at them, he saw something different. He saw two souls standing alone against the universe. And so began the unexpected. War, not of guns and fire, but of hearts and choices. A war that would test what it meant to be human, and what it meant to find trust in the unlikeliest of places. For in the silence of their arrival, the chains were not the only things that bound them. Something greater had already begun, though no one yet understood it. Do you want me to continue by expanding part 2, already written, into 800 words like this part 1? Or keep part 2 at the shorter length I gave earlier, and only expand once we complete the whole outline? The next day began with tension heavy in the air. News of the alien girls had spread across Earth, carried by every screen and broadcast, twisting into fear-filled whispers in every city. Crowds protested outside the military base, demanding answers. Were the strangers prisoners? Weapons? Or a message from something greater than humanity could imagine? No leader gave an answer, because none truly knew. The two sisters were kept in a fenced enclosure, their wrists bound in glowing chains. Guards surrounded them at all hours, rifles in hand. The chains pulsed with faint light, humming as if alive, a warning of power contained. The girls did not struggle. They remained together, heads bowed, speaking only in looks and silence. Soldiers found this more unnerving than violence. At least violence was expected. Silence made them unpredictable. The captain watched them closely. He had learned to read faces in war, fear, rage, despair, and what he saw in theirs was not threat but weariness. It was the look of people who had walked too far, carried too much, and still had no place to rest. His fellow officers mocked him for staring too long, muttering that he was growing soft. But he could not shake the sense that behind their stillness was a truth no one wanted to see. That evening, when the camp quieted and the floodlights flickered against the chain-link fence, the captain walked closer. The guards shifted nervously, but none stopped him. His boots crunched on gravel as he stepped into the enclosure. Both sisters turned their heads at once, their glowing eyes following him. Their posture was cautious, but not hostile. He crouched near them, careful not to appear threatening. His voice was low, steady. "Do you understand me?" he asked. No answer came, only the soft rattle of chains as the younger one pulled her knees closer. Her gaze dropped to the ground. The older sister's eyes lingered on him, sharp yet searching. He touched his chest. "Human," he said slowly. Then he pointed to himself. "Captain." He repeated the words, hoping simple sounds might reach them. For a long time there was nothing, only the hum of machines and the distant buzz of voices from the camp. Then, finally, the older sister whispered, broken but clear, "Earth." The word startled him. Her voice was soft, trembling, like someone relearning how to speak. He nodded quickly. "Yes, Earth, safe." He pressed his hand against his chest again. "Safe." The younger one raised her eyes, tears glimmering in the floodlight. She lifted her bound wrists, the glowing cuffs tight against her skin. "Chains, heavy," she murmured. The captain's throat tightened. Those chains were not just metal, they were a symbol, a mark of punishment from their own people. He wanted to tear them away, but he knew the order: never remove them. To do so was rebellion against the empire that had left them here. He swallowed his anger and leaned closer. "I will help you," he whispered, "but you must trust me." The older sister tilted her head, studying his face as though trying to decide whether his words carried truth. After a long pause, she gave the smallest nod. The younger one's hand trembled as she reached toward him, not quite touching, but resting her fingers against the ground close to his boot. It was not a handshake, not a bond spoken aloud, but it felt like a fragile bridge built in silence. The guards called out, warning him to leave. He rose reluctantly, giving them one last glance before stepping away. But as he walked back into the shadows, he knew the moment had changed him. They were no longer just aliens, no longer just prisoners. They were something else, souls who needed someone to see them, not fear them. That night, sleep refused him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces, those strange, sorrowful eyes that had whispered earth and chains. He thought of all the years he had spent fighting enemies who wanted nothing but destruction, and he realized how different this felt. These girls were not invaders. They were survivors. The next evening he returned, though he risked punishment. This time, he carried a small piece of bread hidden in his coat. Food was tightly rationed, but his conscience could not watch them starve. When no guard was looking, he slid the bread through the fence. The younger sister reached for it, but instead of eating, she broke it in half and passed the larger piece to her elder. The captain felt something twist in his chest. Even in chains, even in fear, they thought of each other first. Over the days that followed, the bond grew. Simple words passed between them. Water, thank you, no pain. The captain spoke slowly, teaching them sounds, watching as their voices grew stronger. They learned to say his name not perfectly, but close enough to make his heart stir. And in their eyes he saw something changing too. They no longer looked only at the sky as if waiting for death. They looked at him, but others noticed as well. Whispers spread among the soldiers. Some mocked him. Others warned that kindness was weakness. The commander summoned him, cold and stern. Do not forget, the man said, they were sent here as punishment. If you treat them as friends, you put this base and this planet in danger. The captain said nothing, but his jaw was tight as he left. He knew the risks. He knew he was already walking a line that could end his career, or worse. But when he saw the sisters again that night, huddled together in the cold, he understood. He could not turn back. He knelt by the fence and whispered, "You are not alone." The older sister met his eyes, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, softly but clear, "Human." "Friend." The word hung in the air like a fragile flame. For the first time, the captain smiled not in triumph, but in quiet certainty. Whatever fate had brought them here, it was no longer just punishment. It was the beginning of something far greater, something that no chains could hold forever. The following week brought unrest both outside and inside the camp. Crowds gathered at the gates, shouting demands for answers. Some carried signs begging the government to send the aliens away. Others carried signs calling for peace, arguing that the strangers had done nothing wrong. The news feeds twisted both sides into fire, and every word painted the sisters as either monsters or saints. The world could not decide. Inside the compound, the tension was worse. Soldiers muttered under their breath whenever they passed the enclosure. Some spat on the ground near the fence. Others joked cruelly about the aliens, calling them trophies of war. The captain kept his silence, but every word burned against his chest. He knew fear could twist men, but he could not stand how it blinded them to the truth. The sisters remained still. They ate little, spoke only in fragments, and never fought back. But the captain noticed small changes. They no longer kept their eyes only on the sky. At times their gazes followed him across the yard, waiting. They were cautious, always cautious, yet he could feel the fragile thread of trust stretching between them. A thread so thin it could be broken with a single harsh command. That evening, an officer cornered him after duty. "They're dangerous," the man said. "You're a fool for treating them like people. One slip, and we'll all be dead." The captain did not answer, but he carried the anger with him as he walked back to the pen. Dangerous? He thought of the younger sister tearing bread in half to share, even though she was starving. He thought of the elder whispering friend in the cold night. If this was danger, it was unlike any he had ever faced. He brought them water, setting the cup through the bars. The younger sister reached with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice stronger now. The elder sister studied him with quiet intensity. "Why help?" she asked. Her words were slow, heavy, each one costing effort. The captain crouched low. "Because no one else will." He hesitated, then added, "Because you don't deserve this." His voice cracked at the end, and he hated himself for it. He had promised to be strong, but the sight of their chains tore at him. The elder tilted her head, as if weighing his heart. "You risk," she said at last. He nodded. Yes, but some risks are worth taking. That night he lay awake thinking of those words. The chain of command demanded obedience, demanded silence, but his conscience demanded something else. He thought of every order he had followed in his career, every battle fought without question. And he wondered if this was the moment he had been waiting for, not a war to win, but a truth to stand for. The next morning, he found the commander waiting for him. The man's voice was sharp, his eyes narrow. You've grown too close. These creatures are not your allies. They were sent here for punishment. Do not forget that. The captain stood tall, meeting his gaze. And what crime justifies starving them? What crime justifies treating them as less than human? The commander's jaw tightened. They are not human. And if you cannot remember that, then you are unfit for your post. The warning rang clear, but the captain did not bend. He left the office with his decision already forming. The world could call them criminals. The soldiers could call them monsters, but he had seen their eyes. He had heard their broken words. And in those words he had heard truth. That night, storms rolled across the sky, thunder shaking the ground. The captain approached the enclosure once more, rain streaking across his uniform. The sisters huddled together against the cold. He crouched low and spoke through the fence. I made a choice today, he whispered. I don't care what they call you. I will not leave you in chains. The younger sister's eyes widened. The elder's lips parted, trembling, but no words came. Instead, she leaned forward, her gaze fierce despite her weakness. Why fight for us? She asked. He exhaled hard, rain dripping from his brow. Because someone has to. For a long moment, there was only thunder. Then the elder nodded slowly. Human, she said. Strong. Heart. The captain almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. Strong heart. He had never thought of himself as such. But from her lips, the words felt like a command. A promise. Lightning split the sky, and in that light, he saw something he had not seen before. The glow of the chains faltered, flickering, as if weakened by her defiance. It lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough. He realized then that the chains were more than bindings. They were alive, feeding on submission. And if the sisters could resist, even for a moment, perhaps they could be broken. He rose to his feet, his decision sealed. From this night forward, he would not stand as their guard. He would stand as their shield. No matter what it cost him. He would choose them over fear, over orders, over the empire that had cast them aside. The war had not been expected. But now it was no longer between Earth and the stars. It was inside his heart, a war between obedience and justice. And he knew which side he had chosen. The weeks that followed turned Earth into a furnace of fear. The sisters' arrival had spread across every screen, and though they had lifted no hand against humanity, suspicion burned hotter with each passing day. Politicians debated in grand halls, generals whispered behind closed doors, and news anchors filled every broadcast with questions no one could answer. Were the alien girls criminals? Were they spies? Or were they victims abandoned by an empire too cruel to care? The people demanded certainty, but none came. Fear filled the gaps instead. Rumors spread that the sisters carried diseases, that their chains were weapons in disguise, that their eyes could bend men to their will. None of it was proven, yet none of it needed to be. Humanity's oldest instinct was to fear the unknown. And the sisters were the most unknown thing anyone had ever seen. The camp itself had become divided. Some soldiers treated the girls with mocking cruelty, throwing scraps of food at their feet as though feeding animals. Others avoided the enclosure entirely, unwilling to even look at them. Only the captain walked there night after night, slipping through shadows when he could, speaking in soft tones, teaching them words, listening to their broken voices. The bond had grown, fragile but unshakable. Yet the more it grew, the more dangerous it became. One evening, the captain returned to his quarters to find his belongings scattered across the floor. His personal effects had been searched. A warning had been left on his bunk, a slip of paper with a single word scrawled in red: traitor. He burned it in his hand but carried the ashes in his chest. Someone had seen too much. The next morning, the commander summoned him. "You have crossed a line," the man said. His tone was calm, but the weight behind it was steel. "They are not yours to protect. The people demand blood. The council is leaning toward execution. And if you stand in the way, you will fall." With them, the captain's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had no proof to offer, no argument strong enough to shatter the fear that had poisoned the world. He left the office in silence, but inside his heart raged. Execution. The word struck like a blade. How could humanity kill two beings who had done nothing but survive? That night, when the rain returned and thunder shook the walls, he found the sisters huddled together in the mud. Their chains glowed brighter than usual, as if feeding on their despair. He pressed himself close to the fence, his voice sharp with urgency. "You must tell me why," he whispered. "Why were you sent here? Why would your own people chain you and cast you away?" The elder sister's eyes met his, filled with sorrow so deep it seemed endless. For the first time, she answered fully. "We refused order," she said slowly. "Empire, command us to kill. We protect weak. They call us traitor." The younger sister nodded, her voice trembling. "We save, they punish." The truth struck him harder than any blow. They had been punished for mercy, banished for kindness, cast in chains not because they were monsters, but because they had refused to be. The Empire had sent them to Earth not to be destroyed, but to be an example. A warning. This was not exile, it was execution by humiliation. The captain clenched his fists until his nails dug into his palms. He had seen cruelty before, but never dressed so proudly as justice. Now he understood why they sat in silence, why they carried sorrow in their eyes. They had been betrayed by their own blood. The next day, protests at the gates swelled to riots. Stones were thrown. Fences rattled. People screamed for the aliens' death, convinced their chains were not enough. The government broadcast speeches, urging calm, but behind the words was a rising tide of fear that no speech could dam. Soldiers grew harsher. Guards carried heavier rifles. The world was shifting, and it was shifting toward violence. That evening, the captain found the sisters waiting for him at the edge of the pen. Their eyes followed him as he approached, glowing faintly in the floodlight. The elder leaned closer, her voice low. "Danger come," she whispered. The captain nodded. He had felt it too. "Yes," he said. "But you will not face it alone." She studied him for a long moment, as if searching for weakness in his words. At last she whispered, "You choose us." He swallowed hard. It was not a question, it was a truth. He reached through the bars and touched the cold metal of her chains. "I choose you," he said firmly, "whatever comes." In the distance, alarms blared suddenly. Soldiers rushed across the yard. The sky above the base filled with dark clouds, but woven among them were shapes, vast ships sliding out of the void. The Empire had returned. Floodlights swept the heavens, catching the gleam of alien metal. The same fleet that had delivered the sisters now loomed above Earth again, silent and massive. The soldiers panicked, shouting orders, pointing weapons. Uselessly toward the sky, the captain's blood ran cold. He understood what this meant. The Empire had come to finish what it started. The sisters pressed close to the fence, their chains pulsing like fire. The elder's voice was sharp with fear and fury. "They kill us. Kill you." The captain stood straight, his jaw set, his hands trembling only with rage. He looked up at the sky, then back at them. "Then we will fight." And in that moment, he knew there was no turning back. The world had turned against them, but so had the stars. Humanity would have to decide whether to betray its fear or embrace its courage. And he would lead the choice, even if it cost him everything. The night sky glowed with the shadow of ships. They hovered high above the clouds, silent and unmoving. Yet their presence pressed down like a weight on every chest below. Earth trembled under the gaze of an empire that had already decided its judgment. The sisters knew what it meant. The captain knew too. The fleet had not come to negotiate. It had come to erase. Inside the camp, fear turned to panic. Soldiers loaded weapons, though every man knew their rifles would do nothing against such ships. Officers barked orders to prepare defenses, though defenses meant little when the enemy filled the sky. Civilians outside the gates screamed through the fences, demanding protection, demanding blood, demanding answers no one could give. The world had split into chaos, and at the center of it, two chained girls knelt in the mud. The captain pushed. Through the storm of voices and steel, his mind locked on the enclosure. He found them huddled close, chains burning bright against their pale wrists. They looked up as he approached, their eyes fierce but filled with sorrow. The elder spoke first, her voice strong despite the fear around them. "Empire come. End. U.S." The captain crouched near the bars, his heart pounding with anger. "No, they will not touch you." His words were firm, though deep down he feared he was promising the impossible. Still, he could not let them see doubt. He had already chosen his path. The younger sister reached her trembling hand through the gap in the fence. For the first time, she touched his sleeve, her chains rattling softly. "Why?" she whispered. "Why fight? For us?" He met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Because mercy is not a crime. Because you showed more humanity than your empire ever did." His voice broke, but his resolve did not. Because no one deserves chains for choosing to protect the weak. The elder's eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. She leaned forward, her voice low. "We save, they punish. We love life. They fear love." Her words struck him like fire. He saw it clearly now. The empire had punished them not for violence, but for kindness. They had defied orders to slaughter the helpless. They had chosen life over conquest. And for that choice, they were condemned. Captain's fists tightened. "Then I will stand with you. Until the end." That night, as thunder rolled across the sky and the fleet above hung like vultures, he made his decision final. He gathered the soldiers under his command, men who still trusted him, and spoke with a voice that carried through the storm. "These girls are not our enemies. They are prisoners of cruelty. If the empire demands their death, then it demands our silence in the face of injustice. I will not be silent. Stand with me, or stand aside." Some turned away, fear burning in their eyes. But others stepped forward, their jaws clenched, their hands steady. A small number, yet enough. Enough to form a shield around the sisters when the moment came. As dawn broke, the Empire's message came. A voice boomed through the clouds, carried by strange machines that bent the air itself. It spoke in human tongue, clear and merciless. "Return the traitors. Break their chains before our eyes, and let them burn. Refuse, and Earth will share their fate." The base shook with fear. Officers shouted to comply, to surrender the sisters. The commander himself ordered the captain to hand them over. But the captain stood firm, his hand resting on his weapon. "No," he said, "we will not be executioners." The commander's face went pale with fury. "You damn us all," he hissed. "Then let me be damned," the captain answered. His voice rang across the yard. "But I will not betray them." The sisters pressed against the bars, their glowing eyes fixed on him. For the first time since their arrival, the elder's voice carried strength instead of sorrow. "You choose us," she said, her words steady, sure. He nodded. "Yes, always." In that moment, something strange happened. The chains around their wrists flickered, their glow stuttering as though the power inside them faltered. The sisters gasped, staring down at the cuffs. The captain watched in awe. It was as if the chains were tied not only to their bodies, but to their hope. And hope, once fed, was breaking them apart. The younger sister lifted her trembling wrists, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. "Love. Stronger," she whispered. The elder looked at the captain, her voice fierce. "They fear what we carry, they fear heart." And he understood. The Empire's greatest terror was not war or rebellion. It was compassion. It was love that broke obedience. Love that made slaves into defiant souls. The fleet above stirred, beams of light piercing. The clouds preparing for destruction. Soldiers braced for impact. Civilians screamed behind fences. Yet inside the pen, chains cracked like thunder. Shards of light splintered into the air as the cuffs snapped apart, broken not by weapons, but by will. The sisters stood tall, free for the first time, their eyes blazing with defiance. The camp froze in shock, even the commander silenced. And at the center of it all, the captain stepped forward, his voice a roar. "If you want them, you'll have to take us all." The sisters moved to his side, no longer prisoners, no longer silent. They stood as equals, unbound, their chains shattered on the ground. And in that moment, the heart of the war changed. It was no longer Earth against Empire. It was compassion against fear, love against chains. The first rays of morning struck the shattered cuffs scattered across the ground. Soldiers stared in disbelief, their weapons hanging useless at their sides. The alien sisters stood free, their backs straight, their eyes burning with light that seemed to grow brighter by the second. The captain stood with them, his hand hovering over his weapon, though in his heart he knew the true battle was not one of steel. It was of choice. Above, the fleet moved. Dark shapes glided lower through the clouds, their hulls shining with cold fire. Beams of light sliced across the earth, scanning the base, measuring, preparing. A voice rumbled again, heavier than thunder. "The empires will give in sound. They are ours, return them. Obey or be destroyed." The commander turned to the captain, his face pale, his voice broken between fear and anger. "You can't fight this. If you stand against them, Earth will burn." The captain met his gaze, calm and steady. "Earth burns already when we surrender what makes us human. If we bow to fear, then we are already lost." The commander had no answer. His silence was enough. The Empire's beams struck down, carving into the yard. Soldiers scattered, some dropping their rifles in panic, but the captain did not move. The sisters stepped forward, their chains gone, their strength no longer hidden. Energy glimmered around their hands, faint at first, then pulsing brighter, like power long held back by restraint. The elder lifted her arms, and the beams faltered. The younger cried out, her voice echoing across the storm, and light cracked the sky. The fleet above shifted, uncertain. The sisters stood tall, their power surging not as weapons of destruction, but as shields. The air shimmered around them, a wall of force that bent the Empire's wrath away. The captain felt the ground quake beneath his feet, yet he stood firm. Refusing to take a step back, the Empire's voice thundered again. "Traitors, ye choose death." The elder turned her head, her eyes locking with the captain's. "No," she said firmly, her words clear, her voice no longer broken. "We choose love." The younger sister reached for the captain's hand. Her skin was warm, trembling, but alive with power. He gripped it tightly, feeling her strength flow into him, or perhaps his into her. In that contact, something greater sparked. It was not just defiance. It was unity. The light around them flared. For a moment, it seemed the world itself was holding its breath. Then the chains lying broken on the ground disintegrated into dust, carried away by the wind. The sisters lifted their heads high, and the Empire's beams shattered against their shield. Panic rippled through the fleet. Ships drifted back, their weapons silenced. They had sent chains to bind, fear to control, and now both lay broken at the feet of those they sought to crush. The Empire had no answer for what it saw. Compassion had become resistance. Love had become a weapon greater than conquest. The commander who had once demanded obedience dropped to his knees, staring in awe. Soldiers who had cursed the sisters now lowered their rifles and bowed their heads. The world had changed in an instant, and all of them knew it. The fleet lingered only a moment longer before retreating into the clouds. Their shadows vanished into the sky, leaving Earth untouched. The Empire had come to destroy, but it had left defeated, not by fire or steel, but by something it could never conquer. Silence fell over the base. Then the people outside the gates began to cheer, their voices rising like a wave. The sisters turned slowly, their glowing eyes softening. For the first time they smiled not in triumph, but in relief. The younger whispered, her voice trembling. "Free." The captain stepped closer, his voice steady. "Yes, free." The elder placed a hand over her chest, her gaze fixed on him. "We came in chains, we leave with heart, with love." He bowed his head, unable to speak for a moment. Then he said simply, "Then go knowing Earth stands with you." The sisters shared a glance, then looked back to him. "Not without you," the elder said. "You broke chains too, in us, in you." He felt the truth of her words. He had broken his own chains of obedience, of silence, of fear. He had chosen defiance not for glory, but for what was right. And in that choice, he'd found more strength than any weapon could offer. The sky cleared slowly, the sun rising through the last of the storm. The sisters stood side by side, no longer prisoners, no longer exiles. They were symbols now of hope, of courage, of love that could not be shackled. And the captain knew their story would echo far beyond this moment. As the gates opened and the crowd surged forward, cheering and weeping, the captain stood with the sisters at his side. He felt the world shift beneath his feet, not from fear, but from possibility. The unexpected war had ended not with conquest, but with compassion. Not with chains, but with love. And so the two alien girls who had come to Earth in chains left, with hearts unbound, carrying with them the strength of a bond that not even an empire could break.